They call Aberdeen the Granite City. And standing on the coast of the North Sea, you can understand why. Built from the glittering grey stone surrounding it, the city feels solid and permanent. But for 50 years, Aberdeen's real bedrock wasn't stone. It was oil. Oil helped to build this city, with around 15% of its residents working directly in oil and many more in related roles. But it didn't just build Aberdeen. It forged its identity, giving a sense of pride and purpose to the tens of thousands of people who helped to power a nation. And that's also why we're here, because that identity is unravelling.
The SNP used to say it's Scotland's oil. Now they just want to just stop oil.
That's not a just transition. A just transition will be making sure that we build our renewable capabilities at the same time as we preserve those vitally important oil and gas jobs.
Climate crisis has not gone away, but even if we were to put to one side the environmental considerations, it's not credible to suggest that the short-term solution to this crisis lies in increasing North Sea production.
I want to see much more stringent climate compatibility checkpoints for projects like Rosebank and others that are coming forward.
I think there's real doubts about whether it is consistent with our climate change obligations to go ahead with new oil and gas production.
We also have an SNP government asleep at the wheel with no energy strategy and who are selling out communities all over the North East.
With the UK committed to reaching net zero climate targets by 2050, the oil and gas industry that was once the heart of the UK's energy supply is being dismantled. And in political speeches, you'll hear a promise of a just transition, one that's fair to the workforce and protects everyone involved. But what I'm hearing on the ground is something else. A rising tide of anxiety and an overlooked mental health crisis. And it makes you ask, is this truly what a just transition looks like? And how can we make it better? Welcome to the Human Transition. Hi, I'm Mia, and this is the Human Transition, a new podcast focusing on climate change discussions. In our first series, we travel across Scotland's energy coast in 3 episodes, starting with Aberdeen, then landing in Shetland, and finishing up in Orkney. In each episode, we will hear from the people on the ground, working and living in communities at the centre of Scotland's energy transition, in the hope that we might better understand what is going on at this time of huge change in the oil and gas industry. Now, in case you are not at all familiar with the situation and why this change is happening, let's zoom out a bit. It's clear that the world we know is changing, and the conditions that have kept our climate stable for thousands of years are now unbalanced. The impacts are global, and time is running out to stop it. A massive driver of the climate crisis is from fossil fuels, like oil, gas and coal. Nearly 3/4 of the carbon emitted by humans comes from the fossil fuel industry, and within that figure, oil makes up 1/3 of it. So the shift towards greener energy supplies isn't so much a choice as it is a necessity. But for the Scottish communities that rely on the oil and gas industry, and have done for nearly 50 years, that necessity can feel like a betrayal, and is a source of continuous anxiety. With the transition going ahead, the oil and gas sector is in decline, and it's estimated that nearly 60,000 jobs will be lost before 2030. And the growth of the green sector is slow, and there are not enough jobs available to replace the ones that are being lost. Without a clear transition plan, the path forward feels very uncertain. So through the next few episodes, we hope to get a better insight into the problems that these communities are facing, and what they need if we are to achieve the just transition that was promised, and secure the greener future that we need. The energy transition isn't just about policy or infrastructure. It's about people, and the anxiety that comes when a community's entire identity begins to change. When I first started this project, I was struck by the disconnect between the official promise of a just transition and the messy, emotional reality for the people living through it. Before we can talk about solutions, we first need to understand the human reality of living through that. And to do that, we need to listen. So on today's episode in Aberdeen, we're going to start by hearing from someone who has spent nearly 3 decades working in the oil and gas industry. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you here. And would you like to give us a little bit of your history and how you got into working in the North Sea oil and gas industry?
Well, I was academic enough, but I wasn't disciplined at school. So I always thought it would be nice just to go and start working offshore once I was 18. And that, because that's the minimum age you're allowed to go offshore, 18. So I thought once I get to 18, I'll stay on at school. I didn't really study and such when I was at school because I always had the mindset, okay, I'm going to get a job in the oil industry. So then when I was 18, I left school. I did get a job, but it wasn't really directly in the oil industry. It was indirectly in the oil industry, and it was onshore. It wasn't going offshore. So I was working doing this, and the money was okay. It wasn't fantastic money or great money and such, and it was the job itself was good enough. I was busy enough, and it was I was working hard enough, and there was enough work for me to do, you could say. But I much preferred, I always had my mindset on going offshore, so I got an interview with a company and then passed the interview and such, and then went offshore when I was 20. And then I've been sort of offshore in the oil industry ever since.
Aaron, your story is a familiar one here in Aberdeen. For generations of young men, going offshore wasn't just a job, it was a rite of passage. You said you had the mindset for it, and that speaks volumes. This wasn't just an industry, it was the bedrock of the community's identity. It promised you a clear path forward, with an income and a sense of purpose that was woven into the city. So what was it like working offshore?
Believe it or not, it's quite a disciplined sort of workplace, especially being offshore and such. The industry in a whole, you could say, is very, very safety conscious. They don't want to hurt people. They understand that by having an incident-free work environment, injury-free work environment, that people actually work harder and you get better results. Almost not army-like, but it's like, people understand that they're there and they've got to do the job and they're there to do the job. They can't slack off and such, Discipline to the point where if there's going to be a problem or a mess up here, it's not going to be on me.
This is something I've heard quite a lot. This intense, almost military-like focus on physical safety. Every procedure is designed to prevent accidents, but what I notice is that there isn't a similar focus on mental or emotional safety, and it seems like the job has quite a lot of pressure as well.
Yeah, you had to deal with the pressure, and you just had to face it and think, right, I've got to do this job because there's no one else going to do it. There's no one, I can't just phone someone else and say, come and help me. It's you're offshore, you're there, you're alone. So if you want to keep your job, you've got to make sure that you can go off to the rig, you can go to the well site on your own. Because if something comes back and it's your fault and you haven't checked it, you're going to get run off.
This pressure you talk about, the stress of being alone on a rig, making critical decisions, that was just part of the job, and you were expected to handle that on your own. And were there any environmental concerns as well when you started out, and were you worried that they would put your jobs at risk?
It was never so much when I started, it was whether we would have enough oil and gas left to see out another 25 years. But obviously it's 25 years or 30 years since I started, and there's more of there's more now than what there was then, and we were thinking it was going to run out. So it was never a case of thinking climate change and such. We need to. It was like, okay, they're going to have to try and find places where they can get oil from, so they would continue drilling. But we weren't necessarily going to lose our jobs, or the industry was going to go on a decline because of climate change. It was going to be because of reservoirs being spent, and there wasn't enough oil in the sort of grounds to be able to continue the lifestyles that we lead. So, you could say maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could see the climate change sort of things coming in with COP25 and COP24, all these things. So you see they start becoming more publicised, and so you do start seeing more of it. And obviously with sort of wind turbines and these things, can't help noticing that you could say that there is a sort of a climate change is happening out there, and there's a sort of, you could say, a green fuel agenda.
And have you witnessed a noticeable decline here in Aberdeen?
This year has had a little bit of a slowdown, but generally in the last 5 years it's been very, very busy everywhere, apart from the UK, because they don't want to drill more wells, give more licenses and more concessions to produce more oil or gas. there's layoffs in the paper, I think it's about 400 to 800 a month so far this year. And then a lot of different sort of layoffs that come related to those sort of issues as well. But yeah, I mean, Aberdeen, you can see a difference in Aberdeen now as opposed to what it was like, say, mid-80s, even mid-90s. There's a big difference now to what it was back then. People don't have the same confidence in their jobs, in the industry in general. You'd see guys coming in now, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, from the US, South America and such. You don't see many people coming in now, or people that I talk to saying, yeah, I'm working in Aberdeen or I'm going to Aberdeen. It seems to be pretty flat. There's nobody coming over here to work. There's not much opportunities here at all.
So this is where we see that disconnect I mentioned earlier between the official promise, the one we hear from politicians, that this is a planned, orderly and just transition. But what you're describing, Aaron, is a city that feels like it's being hollowed out, where the confidence is gone and the new opportunities haven't yet arrived to fill the void. So where are people turning now for employment?
They're moving to green energy, you could say. So they're trying to relocate people from, you could say, fossil fuel to green energy. But, I mean, there's still, at the same time, there's university students coming through that are looking at those jobs also. So, I mean, there are some projects there, but I don't think there's enough projects and enough jobs out there with sustainable wages that are going to be enough to sort of cover the oil industry going forward.
So do you think people in Aberdeen are actually willing to embrace this transition?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, they're accepting of it, but if it's done right, like I say, it's not just a case of, okay, just stop doing one and start doing the other. It's got to be phased in, and both of them have got to work alongside each other.
Is that transition from oil to green energy easy in terms of skills and experience?
I mean, it's a good transition. It would be an easy transition, yeah, because like I say, it's especially working offshore and in oil and gas, you've got to be responsive. You've got to be, you can't be sort of slacking off. So I think for people to move into people from the oil industry to move into the green energy, yeah, it wouldn't be an issue for them to do it. Whether there's enough pay and whether there's enough opportunities, I think that would be where there'd be issues.
With all this going on, it must be stressful, and you've talked about a focus on physical safety within the industry and keeping people safe, but what about mental health support? Do people talk about the stress and uncertainty? Because, I mean, that could lead to something dangerous happening as well, if you're feeling distracted and mentally taxed.
Not so much, because it's quite it's kind of a macho workplace, you could say. In a way, it's not a bunch of, cavemen running around doing stuff. It is like people are people, but at the same time, yeah, it is kind of macho, but it's not like you could go and speak to someone and say, listen, have you got a couple of minutes? I'm feeling quite low or whatever. But it still doesn't mean you're going to be, if you're not happy at work, that something might not happen. Or
do you think people are feeling even more stressed now with the transition and job insecurity and don't want to talk about it or don't feel like they can talk about it?
I think so, definitely, yeah. Some guys will. When the oil price comes down to the low side, people start getting worried and such, because obviously people have got families, they've got houses, they've got mortgages, the wages are getting driven down, the offshore bonus rate is getting driven down.
So what changes do you want to see being made in order to help with this growing stress and pressure?
I mean, energy companies, yeah, if they would, look at what they're doing and, okay, they do operate safely and they do operate, within the rules and such, but instead of trying to squeeze all the companies and everything is paid on is focused on cost rather than service quality.
So putting an emphasis on quality over cost could help relieve the pressure and take some of the stress away. Alright, thank you so much, Aaron, for answering my questions. Hearing your story, you get a real sense of the pressure that defines this industry. It's a world built on discipline and self-reliance, but it's your comment about the macho workplace that really sticks with me. It's a quiet acknowledgement of a much bigger unspoken problem. Because while the industry has spent decades perfecting physical safety, the emotional well-being of its workforce has been left largely unprotected. When we talk about the cost of this energy transition, this is what we're missing. It's not just about jobs and economics, it's a toll on the mental health of the community. It's reported that around 1 in 5 oilfield employees struggle with depression, anxiety, or substance abuse, and 2 out of 5 admitted to having suicidal thoughts. And now, with the growing uncertainty and financial pressure, there's even more strain. So that's why our next guest is so important. She's seen this crisis from both sides. Michelle has worked in the oil and gas industry for a long time, over 30 years, But Michelle also works alongside her full-time job as a mental health counsellor. Hi Michelle, welcome to the podcast. I'm keen to know how you got into the oil and gas sector as well, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about that.
So my dad and uncle both worked offshore in the oil industry, and I knew lots of people who worked in the oil industry, both onshore and offshore. So my friend was working at Wood Group and a job came up for a technical clerk, and she arranged an interview for me and I got the job. The pay was £4.50 per hour and I was absolutely delighted because I thought I was rich.
Did anyone ever talk about, the consequences of burning fossil fuels or concerns about climate change?
For me, no, I never noticed it. I never heard anyone speaking about it. It was all about their fancy cars and their watches and what they'd been buying and their big houses. And so there was nothing about the climate. It was all about them and money. People were coming here in their droves to try and make money from all over.
What's your perception of the transition that's taking place in Aberdeen's energy sector?
I think that the oil and gas industry is definitely undergoing a transformation due to the global push for cleaner energy sources and the drive to reduce carbon emissions. The pressure on workers is increasing due to rapidly changing skills requirements, especially for the older people. It's okay for younger people coming in. And I think it's difficult for some of the older people who've spent a long time in the industry to sort of retrain, to go back to learning and training again, and to even support the energy transition. I think that some people don't want change, and some people don't even believe in climate change. Donald Trump said, drill, baby, drill, and so many people have jumped on that bandwagon and gone, yeah, we need to go back to drill, baby, drill. And there's still a lot of people feel like that in the oil industry, especially the older folk I'm saying older, I mean, I'm in my 50s now, but are still guys in their 60s there, and they're just like, oh, it's just nonsense. There's no such thing as climate change. They just disbelieve it. They just think it's absolute nonsense. And yeah, then I got time for it. They're so into drilling, and for them, Donald Trump getting a sort of second season coming back is great for them. But then we've got to think about the future as well, and we've got to think about the environment and the planet, and different companies are different, one extreme to the other.
So looking back, when did you feel the ground start to shift in the industry?
I remember back in 2009 when I was working for PSN, Production Services Network. I was working specifically on BP projects, and BP were looking to start decommissioning some of their North Sea assets back then, and that was the first time I'd heard of decommissioning, and I wondered sort of what it entailed and how you would break down the rig, how you would break it down and sell parts, maybe for whatever scrap or whatever you could sell could be sold. So that was the first I'd heard of that. And then in 2017, when I was working at NG, which was formerly known as GDF Suez, they sold 70% of their exploration and production business to Neptune Oil and Gas in order to reduce the group's carbon footprint. The price of oil was dropping. It was really cheap to buy. Jobs were at risk and so on. So NG just said, we didn't want to work in this climate. It's so unpredictable. We're going to sell off 70% of our sort of business. And so that obviously led to redundancies. It was a real sudden change, and people were like worried about what it meant for them, and people were looking for other jobs and sending out their CVs and on the phone to agencies and so on, looking for other work, knowing that other companies might follow suit all over Aberdeen. Aberdeen's a small place, so everybody was speaking to each other. We're a bit worried about redundancies here. Is there anything at your company? And so people were looking to either take redundancy or move or look to retrain, really.
This sounds like such a clear example of that disconnect we've been talking about. A corporate decision is announced, and they want to sell off most of the company to be in line with policy targets for carbon emissions. But on the office floor, that decision translates into fear and panic, a period of intense uncertainty where every conversation is shadowed by the fear of losing your job. So I'm wondering about this sudden job insecurity and that threat of redundancy. Did you experience this yourself?
Well, like I was just saying, in 2017, after NG had sold 70% of their exploration and production business, there was the option to take a redundancy package, and I and some others decided to take it. but it was already like a stressful environment as people didn't know what was happening with their jobs or what the future would bring. So morale was really low. And people didn't really speak about their mental health. Even now, people are opening up a bit, but back then, in such a male-dominated industry, it was difficult times for people. And I was the first batch that took redundancy. I was part of that. But then the people who stayed, I kept in touch with them, and it was always looming over them as well, but they were scared to take the redundancy. It was like, do I take the redundancy? Do I stay? Do I see what happens? So it was that decision. It just continued on. Then there was a second round of redundancies. This time, less money, less offer on the table for people.
How did the work environment shift? What was the office atmosphere like?
I seen aggressiveness, because it was, like I say, a lot of males, so maybe 80% males in the office, and they were snappy and quiet and, I guess, just sort of detached sometimes, just a little bit. They really, whereas maybe before you might have got a good crack, you might have had good fun with them, or might have been a bit of banter, kind of withdrawn a bit. Yeah, because, you get used to a particular lifestyle. There was one guy who had just taken a job and just bought a house, had a young family, and then suddenly his job was at risk, and it was his first time joining the oil industry, and for him it was like, oh no, I've told my wife we're going to have this money coming in, and then suddenly that's maybe not going to be the case. How am I going to tell my wife, or what potentially might happen, that we're going to need to move out of the house that we've just bought? So the guys were kind of ratty. The guys could be kind of sharp with you, and you could hear them on the phone to their wives, because it was an open plan office, and so you could hear like snapping, and you had to flex to different people's styles in a way, and you had to sometimes bite your tongue, and you had to be non-judgmental and think he's just having a bad day. It's a shame for him as well. Everybody's going through shit, everybody, regardless of what you might think and see. Maybe people come in with a smile, but really you might hear them in the corner speaking to their wives or whatever.
What you're describing here, the snappiness, the withdrawal, the aggression, these aren't just signs of a bad office culture. They're the human symptoms of systematic stress. This is what it looks like when large-scale economic and policy shifts trickle down and land on the shoulders of individuals. What kind of a toll do you think that was taking on people?
That uncertainty and that stress, it's not good for you, and not everybody looked after themselves that great either. So that, and being away from home, a lot of people were away from home, so they would go to the pub every night to help with the stress, and not the best set of circumstances for dealing with stress. The amount of guys that I knew that died young in the oil industry was high, and suffered from issues. So,
what kind of support was given to help cope with this uncertainty?
There was an agency come in to help us rewrite our CVs and to teach us how to give better interviews, interview tips. And so there was that, but it wasn't really around mental health. It was more about, here's some advice on how to get your CV better and how to prepare for interviews and so on. So it wasn't like really about your mental health.
Well, I can see that you're very considerate of mental health, and that's the direction that your career is going in now. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got into that?
So I'd always had a keen interest in personal and professional development, as well as complementary and alternative therapies. So 8 years ago, after working in the oil and gas industry for 25 years, I took redundancy, like we've just spoke about, and I decided to retrain in something completely different from the day-to-day work that I'd been doing for years. When I saw that the Aberdeen University were doing like a counselling skills course, so I decided to take the course, and I just never realised like how much I would love both the theory and the practice. I just found it so interesting, enjoyable and rewarding. So I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made. And then I went on to do my postgraduate diploma in person-centred counselling. So my industry background definitely influenced my work with clients today, because my experience with working in it with a variety of personalities, there's a real mix of people, thousands of people that I've worked with in the oil and gas industry, and also as a team lead and manager, because I built my my way up from a tech clerk right up to a manager. And I guess that helped me develop like my emotional intelligence and my empathy for others, as well as my genuineness, because they can see right through you in Ireland. The guys, you've just got to be genuine with them. You had to almost handhold the guys sometimes, because actually you ended up feeling real empathy for them, because they come across as big and tough and hard, but really you see a different side to them on their own as to fit they might be in front of their teammates, other bravado and stuff. So the skills definitely carried over from working with some tough personalities into the counselling.
I'm wondering, well, from what I've seen, people don't seem to talk enough about the mental health impacts that come from worrying about climate change. But is this something you've seen in your counselling work?
I feel that people are anxious about climate change and about the uncertainty that this brings with regards to both future, like the planet, the environment, as well as their own future. It's a mix of uncertainty, and which causes stress, which causes, everything that goes with stress, worry, anxiety, what am I going to do, what's going to happen to the world. People can get really quite a sort of feeling of doom about it. But then I suppose there's other way of looking at it, like, well, what can I do to help it?
In your experience working in Aberdeen, do you think there needs to be better consideration of mental health impacts that come from climate change and the transition and everything else that's going on here?
I feel like even if mental health was being taken seriously enough in the policy conversations around net zero and just transitions, how we're going to support and fund people requiring mental health support? Because the waiting times for NHS mental health treatment are just horrific. And then the majority of people can't afford or access private therapy either. So we can consider it, but how are we going to support it? Like Mental Health Aberdeen is just gone into liquidation yesterday, and they are supporting like adults and children in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire and in schools and in the industry, everywhere, everybody needs support. And suddenly there's no more funding. And they've gone in, after 75 years, they've gone into liquidation, which leaves some charities that can support, but the NHS waiting list is like 2 years. So it just feels like there's not enough funding and consideration, serious consideration given to people's mental health regards to, policy conversions and just transitions and net zero and so on. I think it's all a fantastic idea, but when people are going through that anxiety, how do you support them when there's such a huge waiting list? It is very, very frustrating. I get really passionate about it and I sound cynical, but it's like, how do we support them on top of everybody else that's needing support just now? Waiting for 2 years, by that time, it's just too late. You don't know, is it too late? Suicide rates are going up, it's... Who's going to help them in the meantime? By that time, you've lost your confidence, your identity, you lose everything. It just gets worse as time goes on. So I really do not feel that, unfortunately, that the healthcare and counselling system is equipped, and it's so sad.
I can hear the frustration and urgency in your voice. What you're laying bare is a critical failure. At the very moment the pressures of the energy transition are creating a mental health crisis in communities like Aberdeen, the public health services designed to help are collapsing. The 2-year waiting lists you mention represent a complete breakdown in the duty of care, leaving people to cope with immense psychological strain on their own. So what do you think can be done differently going forward?
I honestly feel like mental health professionals have got so much to offer. We can play a significant role in contributing to discussions with regards to mental health and well-being strategies and investment. That's what the experts are. We know about the funding, we know about the strategies, we know about how we can help. So let us into the conversations and let's all try and work together and help each other and help the planet and help the climate and just, I know that sounds a bit imagine all the people, but it involve the right people in the conversations.
So you want to see more discussions that actually involve mental health professionals and those that are affected by this transition?
It's really frustrating when people make decisions without the proper key stakeholders in the room, and then you read about it in the news and you go, what? Really? Or finding out in social media that a charity's gone under and you're like, oh my goodness, Yeah, it's such a contrast for me dealing with trying to scrape a couple of grand to working on a $6 billion project in oil. It's one extreme to the other because every penny counts. So it's like billions to pennies.
I think the phrase billions to pennies is perfect to sum up the frustration that people are feeling towards oil companies in general. And it would take so little from them to go such a long way in helping climate change impacts and supporting the mental health of a city that supplied their workforce for half a century. So thank you for that nice little takeaway, Michelle. It's been great having you on the podcast, and you as well, Erin. And that wraps up our guests for today. Tackling the mental health problems discussed today will take time, and if these movements aren't being initiated from our leaders, we need to question why, and bring awareness to these hidden crises ourselves. I feel like, hearing from Michelle and Erin today about these problems, it's more clear than ever that the energy transition in Scotland is a situation with a lot of complexity. And while the identity of Aberdeen is changing because it's no longer a booming oil capital, there is an opportunity here to forge a new one, by tackling these problems together and listening to the community voices, so we might build stronger alliances going forward. And that is the difficulty with the transition, if we are to make it truly just. When forging ahead to secure a greener future, leaders need to support these communities, not just economically, but psychologically. On the Human Transition podcast, we hope to become a platform where these difficult discussions can be had, so that we might see where the divide is and work together to change it and inspire leaders to drive positive action. And it's important to consider our privilege in getting to talk about these issues. While the conversation in Scotland is vital, it's just one part of a global story, with the most drastic impacts of climate change often being felt in the nations that have contributed least to the problem. And with that in mind, please don't hesitate to get in touch with your thoughts and takeaways from today's episode. We want to hear from you, so please have your say through the links below, where we have a feedback forum and more resources if you're keen to learn more about the issues we've discussed. Join us next week for the newest episode in our 3-part series across Scotland, as we take our podcast up to the Shetland Isles, where the conflict is louder because a fierce public battle over a new oil field is taking place.
As you can see just behind me here, the protesters are still going strong.
We're not alright with what the government is doing and not taking enough climate action.
Climate justice! No!
Thanks for listening to The Human Transition. Take care, and we hope to see you again next week.